Can you tell me where my country lies? Said the unicorn to his true love's eyes.
One of the aims of the record was to sort of look at Englishness in a different way, and therefore this title, Selling England by the Pound, seemed to be a good title for the album. So I made my recommendation.
I think one of our best titles ever, actually, Selling Them by the Pound, is a great phrase. You know, Peter on stage with that headgear thing looking a bit like something on the back of a coin. It was a great sort of setting for the song. I think the first part of the song was great. I think the Moonlit Night bit was okay, a bit busy. But I think one of our best album titles, actually.
As far as I remember, Selling England was a relatively happy, calm period in the band's history.
We used to have writing sessions. We didn't necessarily write sort of all in one go, but quite a lot of Selling England was written in one place. And I remember funnily enough, on this particular record, we were a bit stuck for ideas. We had 2 or 3 things that we knew we had. There was this riff that Steve had been playing on stage and all over the place, which we all thought was really good. And we knew we wanted to do something with that. And we developed that into the song I Know What I Like. And it was a quite simple thing, which was quite good for us, really. But we just thought it had a very strong atmosphere. So there's that. And then I had these 3 bits I'd written, which I was originally assumed would go into different songs. But I think probably because the others sort of wanted my stuff sort of a kind of a Banks ghetto, they all ended up in the same song, which ended up being Firth the Fifth. And I really just strung the 3 bits together and made sense of them in a way to make them good. And so those were written, and then we wrote this sort of riff that became the first part of Battling Epping Forest. Other than that, we didn't really have much else. It was kind of like we were struggling a bit for finding things. So we ended up playing these 3 things sort of every day for a long time, and kind of overworked, particularly Epping Forest. I think we overworked it.
There was all this emphasis on writing songs, and I hadn't really written any songs for the album at that point. There were things that were going on in my private life that made it almost impossible to do that. And so really I just had lots of guitar licks, and I used them all on the album. That was the thing. And in some ways that was perfect. It meant that the album took on a more fusion sort of feel, and it was a little bit closer to Mahavishnu Orchestra. There was some tapping, there was some sticking it through a Leslie cabinet, there was that influence. It was a little bit Beatley, it was a little bit that, but it was still very English. And so I had a great time just being the guitarist, not wondering about, not trying to be a songwriter. I think I only come up with one thing as a song, which was After the Ordeal, which started out as this electric thing. I think it plainly didn't work as an electric melody. No one could make it swing. Ended up being this kind of acoustic thing that had a electric bit on the end. But I remember doing this in Chessington. We were in this house in Chessington, and as ever, it was eccentric as ever, I think. For some reason, we were in the living room of a house, and of course it wasn't soundproof, and of course neighbours started to complain, and but nonetheless, the fact that it was slightly out of town, it was slightly quirky, it was slightly strange, it had that homegrown feel about it.
There's a fat old lady outside the saloon, laying out the credit card she plays for two.
Some people see this as a difficult album to make. I don't particularly remember it as being difficult, but I do remember the Chessington sessions when we kind of came up with a cinema show, and then we danced with the Moonlit Night. I was starting to listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra, so I was trying to put my weirdness, my weird time signatures, and into anything that would move, anything that would allow me. So Dancing with the Moonlit Night was, I think, probably some of the instrumental stuff was me and Steve there. I Know What I Like, of course. That was at Una Billings, and we wrote that. And that was us doing our Beatle thing, really, which we didn't see any harm in, because we had yet to have a hit single, so nobody else minded either. But of course, as soon as we had a hit single, that's when they started to mind about us having hit singles. I'd Have Plenty, which I you know, I think I know Tony's said that, you know, kind of he could have done without it. I don't remember it. Firth the Fifth, which is a big tour de force, Cinema Show is a huge tour de force. So I think it's, you know, it's certainly got a lot of what things we still play, huge stage classics on it. I like Cinema Show particularly. I thought the first half was great as well. And we were sounding a little bit better in the studio.
This album was sort of commercially, it sort of came in at number 3 or something, you know. I think I Know What I Like did help. It was a sort of very minor hit, you know. It did sort of get played on the radio a bit and everything. So I think suddenly... But I think also what had happened was that with the live performance, we were picking up fans all the time. And so when the next album came out, suddenly a lot of people went out and bought it all at the same moment, which gave you a bit of chart presence. And we always went down. The second week was always sort of like 3, and suddenly it was down to sort of 25, you know. But it made you feel that you sort of got somewhere.
I love the album. It's completely bonkers from beginning to end. You've got Pete doing this kind of Scottish plain song thing at the front, this a cappella thing, which then goes into the strangest atmosphere, and it retains that strange atmosphere right through to the end. And I know that, or I believe that Mike and Tony are not as fond of that album, but I felt we'd made this sort of leap forward as players. We were doing stuff that was difficult to play and using techniques that no one else was employing. So this was very good. And Tony had just gotten the voice tapes on the Mellotron, so we had that choral thing as well. We were able to do that. So we could sound like an orchestra. We could sound like a choir, and I also think that when we were touring America, the fact that we were purporting to sell England by the pound, it made us all things quintessentially English. So all the Anglophiles turned out for that. And American audiences, of course, they were divided. Not all of them loved this, but sufficient of them did. And I think it was by the time we hit Los Angeles and we were doing a series of Christmas concerts, I really felt the band was absolutely at its best, and I felt that I was playing guitar in, you know, the world's best band at that point. I really felt that.
We had a following, you know, we had a proper following, the cult following, but a proper following. We could play theatres, do a little tour. I think I seem to remember that. We were sort of starting to become a band with an identity.
It was stable. I mean, it felt stable too. I mean, you know, Phil and Steve had very much sort of like, I found their feet within the group, I think, both. Particularly as players, and even Steve is a little bit starting as a writer, although it was still quite early days for him, really. So it was a more integrated sort of thing. You know, it was, you know, still probably, I mean, in all honesty, it probably was still 3, the senior and junior members, you know. But that was sort of to slowly change as time went by.
I think very often people would come in with ideas that were starting points, and then they would sort of get to be the captain of that song, if you like. And some things were emerging in band rehearsal. So it was a sort of dual approach.
Obviously, apart from the Firth the Fifth, really, most of the other things were things that were emerged in the studio to a large extent, and the development I Know What I Like was very much in the studio. I think we liked... I mean, we always felt that sort of the strongest moments seemed to some reason or other come out of us all improvising and jamming and just sort of things coalescing, really. We always liked that very much. And that's what gives you the thrill as well. You're playing along and you know, seeing what might happen. But this obviously, from my own personal point of view, was the first time I'd ever used a synthesizer as well. So it was quite a big move for me. They had this instrument, this Art Pro Soloist thing, which was quite a very simple monophonic synthesizer, but it had quite a nice little range of tones on it. And it was one you didn't have to sort of do any programming, it just was preset sounds, which was nice for me. And then obviously the Cinema Show is very much based on that. But I used it throughout the album on little bits and pieces, and it was a really interesting addition to the sort of armoury, you know, having got also these days I was also organ, piano and mellotron. To have something alternative to play lead on like this, you know, was suddenly opened up possibilities for me. And these little spring keyboard these things had as well. It was very easy to play. It was it certainly opened up my playing possibilities. I used to try and do everything I could with the Hammond organ. I mean, I'd sort of, you put it through fuzz boxes, wah boxes, switch it on and off. You try using one drawbar, one, or just the percussion sound. You try to get every little thing you get out of it. So you're using 100% of the instrument, is the way I was looking at it. Whereas now with a modern synthesizer, if you use kind of, 1/2 of 1%, you're doing well, I think, because they can do so much. A lot of people just switch on and use presets, and that's all they ever do. So it was. It really opened up the possibilities. I mean, the mellotrons were great to an extent, in the sense that they gave you these lovely string sounds and voice sounds and everything, but you couldn't play fast on them or anything. They were just big banks. They were such a crude instrument that when the synthesizers came in, it just opened up the keyboard world so much.
There's always been Ethel. Chicken, wake up, you got to tidy your room now.
Although it may have looked as if, there was more of a pop sensibility on this record, I think sort of Know What I Like was in part an accident. Often when we tried to chase things, we failed miserably. And I think we got to learn really that when we were ourselves and allowed things to happen, that we seemed to have more success and resonance with audiences.
I had this guitar riff. That went ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong, and around the time of rehearsing Foxtrot, I remember putting the guitar through Tony's Leslie cabinets, and Phil and I used to jam on this thing, and no one else was that keen. They said it sounds too much like the Beatles. We're not going to do it. Following album, Phil and I are still jamming away on the same thing, playing it like idiots, and the whole band joined in. It became a jam, it became a song, it became a hit. And I remember joking about this to journalists who said, they wanted to hear it, and I said, you should hear our latest hit single. As if it was a done deal, and I was just joking, and then it became a hit. And I was thrilled, of course.
You must understand that the word pop was, we grew up with the Beatles, the best band in the world, and they were pop. This word pop's become something different now. A great song is a great song. Although we were writing not that at all, they were different pieces, And I suppose I know it's one of the first songs we actually were able to sort of take a short, simple idea and develop it, rather than, like we often do, have too many bits in a song, We just took one riff and sort of made it into a song. Which is great. I mean, it's sort of a real character piece too, with Pete's lyric too.
I never really loved the chorus, which, I mean, of course I like my sections, but I think, that was one of Tony's melody on the da 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 da. And after a while, I got very bored of it. But it was fun playing the sort of jerkier and jumpier melodies of the verse, and doing that with Phil, and then getting into this more floaty, simple chorus line.
We were always associated with heavy, progressive group and all that, but we came into the business writing pop songs, and it's something we'd always loved, and we were really pleased we'd actually written one that we thought was pretty good, and probably would have been quite a big hit if it hadn't sort of had this wardrobe in the title, which no one can understand. But it was just a really nice sort of effect, It just developed very well, chorus very strong, and there's some other songs on this which were not quite as. I probably don't have quite so much time for this album as the previous one, purely because I'm not quite so fond of some of the things. I mean, After the Ordeal was the track I really don't like. I've never liked it. And I would have liked it not to have been on the album, but it was sort of, in the end, we compromised by putting everything we had on. And there's Dancing with the Moon at Night, which I like. I like the way it starts very much, but it's not my favourite song, although I know a lot of people like it very much, but it's a slightly weaker track for me.
For her merchandise, he traded in his prize.
Dancing with the Moon at Night was this attempt to sort of mix some traditional folk elements with more contemporary band arrangements. And I think, even in the colour of the voice I was using at the time, it was folk influence.
I think Dancing with the Moonlit Night has got a lot of great moments on it. And when it starts out, you really don't know where the song's going to go, do you? And there was this da-da-da-da-dum-bum-bum-bum, which Pete wrote on piano and mainly becomes a guitar figure throughout the song. Again, it's someone else's melody interpreted on guitar in two different ways. And there's that lovely bit at the end that we used to call Disney, which they started using for some reason on gardening programs these days. Shot of a gnome, and there's this tinkling 12 string saying, that's Mike's bit there, this sort of repeated chord pattern. But we all operated with rock instruments, but not like a rock group. We all sort of faded ourselves in very, very gently, and we're all being very pastoral.
Yeah, I think there was a growing sense of confidence, and also with that particular track, which I started off writing, I was trying to get a folk reference and sort of, if you like, protect and preserve some of the Englishness. So it was in the opening part, particularly trying to capture something that was had more references to Henry VIII than it did to American song music. And then with the lyric, it was, in a sense, about the commercialization of English culture.
Firth the Fifth is one of those things where Tony just sort of, we'd all get together to play each other our bits, of which he had hundreds, and Mike had quite a few, and Peter had a few, and we'd be steamrolling into playing Firth the Fifth.
Firth the Fifth was, obviously it's a kind of like a very strong sort of keyboard moment from the early years, and the way the guitar solo evolved is quite interesting, really, because I'd written, the three bits, and the second bit I'd written was just really a flute and piano melody, and I'd just seen it as that. And we were playing it, we played it a few times, it sounded really nice. And then one time Steve said, started playing it, and he started playing it sort of like this, and I thought, oh, great, and I started to put the mellotron in big chords like this. And it was almost like a joke. We were kind of doing it sort of like a la King Crimson, is how we saw it. I was just doing this overblown thing. And I thought, actually, that's really good, this. So we then sort of, so for the reprise of that melody, when it came in the second half of the song, we said, well, let's do it this big way and see how it works. And it worked really well. And it gave a chance for Steve to actually do a sort of proper guitar solo.
Tony's melody, which I tried to interpret in a kind of slightly sort of Middle Eastern sort of way. I was bending all the notes, and I remember one or two people said, "Oh, it sounds a little bit Indian, almost like a sitar," and there was a note that I was able to sustain that would work 9 times out of 10 at the to help me do a high F sharp, and just with proximity to the speaker cabinets, it fed back. So it sounded like I had perfect sustain on every note. I didn't, but I was able to fade in the notes on the beginning of it and sort of wait for it, coast over a sort of atmospheric section, and then play this melody, which I think, although it was written as a piano melody originally, it became a flute melody, and then it became this guitar melody, and it's kind of become Genesis' most well-known guitar solo. So yeah, I was allowed to play forever, it seems, this great long guitar solo in the middle of something written by Tony.
Steve, I think, was starting to really sort of find his feet a bit more on as a player live and everything. I mean, obviously he always contributed, a lot of Genesis music obviously required sort of guitar, sort of acoustic guitar picking and stuff, where people notice it less, I think. People tend to notice lead playing a little bit more, and I suppose on this it was more more of a genuine guitar solo. Some of the others are a bit tricksy, you know, he's kind of thinking very hard about every note he played, and so it doesn't sort of soar in quite the way that this does, where I think he, you know, allowed himself to actually have a bit more freedom, you know, with it. Particularly before the main melody starts, just some very nice little phrases and stuff, you know, so it sounds more like a real guitarist.
Once again, it's a nice section. You know, it's about more space. You know, we're taking the main theme from the song and just letting it run for about 4 minutes with a lovely guitar solo playing the melody and some lines in between. So we're starting to give sections more space and more time to sit in one mood rather than move on too fast.
Steve definitely, I think, gained in confidence, and Firth of Fifth is very much a Tony piece in terms of its how it started and how it built. But you know, Steve did let loose in, I think, probably the best way up to that point at the end.
Along the forest road, there's hundreds of cars, luxury cars. Each has got its load of convertible bars, cutlery cars, superstars.
Battle of Epping Forest is a classic example of what I was getting at with Can Utility and Get 'Em Out by Friday, where we had very well recorded as well. I mean, I remember, I can picture this, we were writing it, and we had some really good counter polyrhythmic bits happening, you know. And then Peter took the song and wrote the lyric, and we recorded the track, and then he came in to sing the lyric, and we were just like, it's like 300 words a line, you know. It was like there was no space, any air had been sucked out of it. And not to say that, you know, he was in the wrong or we were in the wrong. It's just that if we'd have only known, we could have thinned it out. And in those days, we didn't go back and re-record things, you know. This is it. We've got our version. We have to make do, you know. You know, I mean, it's incredible to think about, isn't it, really? But, yeah, so we did play it live, but it was always a little bit... It was always like a barrage of information, you know, sort of being thrown at you. So that was the classic example of when that stuff really got out a little bit out of hand.
Coming over the hill, the boys are building Johnny's legs stand very still.
It's probably too busy, you know. I'd spend a lot of time, you know, building up this story with all these characters and setting scenes, and was quite reluctant to edit as severely as I should have done. So I think it did end up too wordy.
They called me the Reverend when I entered the church on stand.
Even at its weakest, Selling England by the Pound has got great moments on it. Great moments, great humour. Very funny bit in the middle of Epping Forest, Pete doing the vicar. You know, just brilliant.
Home from work, our Juliet clears her morning meal.
The other song on this album, I suppose, that kind of was a big development for us again was the Cinema Show, which was another one of those things that starts off with a sort of quiet, you know, acoustic beginning and then ends up doing something else at the end. But I think the instrumental at the end of this was probably the best of the ones we did at this stage in our careers anyhow. Mike had this riff, which was just in 7, just going dang, 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 like that. And he was playing along. And, you know, I'd sort of just started fiddling around on top of it. And then we thought this could be really good. So again, Phil, Mike and I just went off really and put this all together and worked on all these bits. And I just improvised for hours and got the little bits and pieces going. And then Mike would change the chords. And we ended up with this piece. And I think it's, you know, it's such a strong rhythm in the first place. A lot of the things you play on it could be really good, but I got one or two quite good melodies on top of it, and it again built up to a very nice sort of climax, I think, and probably better on stage than it was on the album in many ways. But it was on the album it sort of fades out into the next bit, which I'm not too sure is quite so good. But it was an exciting thing to have created at the time. I think we were very pleased with it.
Cinema Show was lyrically, I think, Tony and Peter. I think. Either Tony and Peter or Mike and Peter. But anyway, and the end, of course, was just based on a guitar riff, you know, a 7/8 drum riff. And then Tony just sort of had lots of bits on top, and eventually that became the themes, which are very strong themes.
I think I was influenced, my playing on that, and there's not that much electric playing of mine, I was influenced by the flute work of Ian MacDonald working with King Crimson, so I tried to play very pastoral phrases. I developed it a bit more when we did it live, doing percussion noises and what have you. But in some ways it typifies the Genesis sound, because you've got almost a plethora of 12 strings going. Sometimes, 2 12 strings, sometimes 3, and an electric 6 string as well. And this jangly sound where you can't tell, it sounds almost, is that a keyboard? Is that a guitar? What is that sound?
The first part's again another example of when I tuned my 12 strings. And normally you have got 12 strings and they're paired up, and you tune each pair to the same note. I started tuning each pair to harmony notes, which is how the song starts, with that sort of rundown. Now, what the hell the tuning is, I haven't got a clue, because the other day in New York we said, well, they were saying, let's do the first half of Cinema Show maybe, And I said, well, all right, but I had no idea how I played it, we'd have to work a compromised version out. But the second part, once again, it seems to be, we started this move really, I think, with myself, Phil and Tony. And what I was doing, Steve, it's more about myself, Phil and Tony, playing, jamming and getting these instrumental moments, like, the back end of the 9/8 in So I Was Ready. This one, which became a large part of our trademark, really. And it was the instrumental part was a huge sort of crowd pleaser. Great live song.
I thought the cover was absolutely brilliant. Betty Swanwick, the fact that she'd done that picture, she was a member of the Royal Academy, and I think it was the front cover of their catalogue advertising the summer exhibition.
She seemed to have, a good combination of Englishness and yet unraveling or exposing the underbelly. And I went down to see her, and then Tony and Margaret came down, and I think I went the first time on my own, but then they came down together, and she was a wonderful character, and she had a parrot, and she kept on talking to the parrot in the middle of the conversation. You weren't quite sure if you were being addressed or the parrot.
We had tea on her lawn, but what was great was she just put the table was on the lawn like that, and she put sort of the tea on that, and it was everything was sort of sliding down the thing, very strange. And the whole time we were there was this parrot that sat on Peter's shoulder, sort of nibbling his collar. It was kind of a somewhat surreal moment. Anyhow, she was an old, reasonably old lady. Anyhow, she said she'd love to do it, but she couldn't do anything from scratch in a month, which is what we needed, So we said, well, can you modify the picture that you've got, which is what she did. She just took the picture she'd had and she added a lawnmower to it so that it fitted with the lyrics to I Know What I Like, and put these people behind the things. And it worked really well. And I mean, in many ways, it's the best piece of art we've ever had on the front cover. Whether it's the best cover, I don't know, but it's the best piece of art we've had on a cover.
So Betty Swanwick was a wonderful woman. She was a little bit like Miss Marple or an Agatha Christie character, full of life, very smart and mischievous.
She was a great old lady, and sort of nice seeing someone from the other world, not just the music world, someone in the art world who was up for sort of trying something.
For me, I mean, the cover was a great cover, the Betty Swanwick cover. That showed that there had been a change of sorts, and from that kind of very almost schoolboy graphic stuff, which was Foxtrot and Nursery Crime. In its way, it was done. I kind of felt it was a little schoolboyish. This was kind of something that was kind of elegant, the Betty Swanwick characters, and that stayed with us as well. I mean, it's a good album.
This album, I think we came together much more as players. I think it's the first, we sound convincing as players to a greater extent. In some ways, it was the most of the early albums. I suppose it's the most, There's a bit more technique in there and stuff. I never, I always like to think the technique is just another sort of paintbrush in a way. It's something you can use, and it can be very effective at times. You should never take over. I think with some groups it sort of it takes over. It becomes the technique's the thing. You get a guitarist who can play so fast that he can't stop doing it and everything. And we're very happy to sort of sit down. I'm just very happy to just sit down and hold down chords, which I do a lot of the time. I think that's, and then other times you would go mad, and that sort of. The contrast works, and you just use it, and it illustrates something you want to try and illustrate with the piece of music you're writing, and I think that's interesting. And as you said before, I think Steve's playing on this was really good. Particularly, obviously, the fifth solo was a sort of standout moment, I think, for his time with us.
I do look back on this one with fondness, although I think the others, I suspect Tony and Mike might have felt that the songs weren't as strong on it. I felt that it was an album that was big on atmosphere, very well arranged, very well played, lots of very interesting techniques, and everyone, playing and toying with things, where form was perhaps secondary to the spirit of it. So there's no other album in the world that any other band has made that sounds remotely like that. There is no album that Genesis made that sounds remotely like that. So I love it for its eccentricity, its invention, and I was thrilled with it, and I still am.
I always liken Selling England and Nursery Crime as sort of similar feeling albums in my mind. I think the good bits are good and the bad bits are a bit dodgy, but I think there's some strong bits there, definitely. And of course our first semi-hit single, almost. Who'd have thought?
There were things that I was less happy with than others, and obviously I think you follow your own bits and pieces further through than everybody else's, but it's I think some of them could have been a bit sharper. I mean, for example, I mentioned the chorus of Know What I Like, which didn't last for me as a pleasurable experience, even though, it got us a hit. Most of our stuff took a few plays to sort of open up to a listener. But if they got it, it would stick around for quite a long time.